Colonel Regina Matthews sat in handcuffs in the back of a police cruiser, her military uniform still pressed and perfect despite 2 hours of detention. Through the smudged window, she watched Officer Marcus Webb typing his arrest report, his fingers moving with the confidence of a man who had done this 100 times before. But he had no idea that in exactly 47 minutes, 3 federal vehicles would surround this station. He had no idea she controlled his department's entire budget, and he had absolutely no idea that this traffic stop would become the most expensive mistake in American policing history. If you're ready for a story about justice, corruption, and one woman who refused to be silent, hit that subscribe button. You won't believe where this goes. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Regina Matthews' bedroom in the Oakmont district of Lakewood Heights. Her alarm hadn't gone off yet. She was already awake, staring at the photograph on her nightstand, her younger brother Marcus in his high school graduation gown, his smile bright with promise. That was 2017. By 2018, he was dead, shot during a traffic stop that went sideways. The officer was cleared. No charges. Not even a reprimand. Regina reached for her Pentagon security badge on the dresser. 23 years of military service had taught her that protocol could protect you when nothing else would. She'd learned to document everything, to stay 3 steps ahead, to turn pain into precision. Her husband's voice drifted from the kitchen. "You're going to be late for that briefing." She wasn't. She was never late. But David knew that wasn't really what he meant. The distance between them had been growing for months, maybe years. Every conversation lately felt like an interrogation neither of them wanted to conduct. "I'll be home by 7, she said, adjusting her uniform in the mirror. "Sure." David didn't look up from his coffee. Save the world first. Regina grabbed her keys and headed for the garage. Her Mercedes-Benz GLE, a gift to herself after her recent promotion to colonel, gleamed in the morning light. She slid behind the wheel and placed her brother's memorial card on the dashboard, like she did every morning. A reminder, a promise. She had a classified briefing at the Pentagon in 3 hours. What she didn't know was that she'd never make it. Across town, Marcus Webb woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing with text messages he couldn't afford to answer. Collection notices. His ex-wife demanding child support. His bookie asking about last night's debt. Webb stumbled to the bathroom and splashed water on his face, avoiding his own reflection. His apartment was a shrine to a man he'd never really known. Photographs of his father in uniform covered every wall. Officer Thomas Webb, decorated, respected, killed in the line of duty. At least, that's the story Marcus told everyone. The truth was more complicated, buried in old internal affairs files he'd never read. But myths are easier to worship than men. Webb pulled on his uniform and grabbed his badge. Number 4719. 8 years on the force. And he still felt like he was proving something. To his dead father, to his ex-wife, to himself. His phone buzzed again. This time it was his lieutenant. "My office, now." 20 minutes later, Webb sat across from Police Chief Daniel Garrett, trying to read the older man's expression. Garrett was the first black police chief in Lakewood Heights history, a distinction he wore like armor and a burden in equal measure. "You're under review," Garrett said simply. Webb's stomach dropped. "For what?" "Evidence handling protocols. Internal Affairs is asking questions." Garrett's tone was deliberately neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Concern? Warning? "Keep your head down, Marcus. Do your job by the book, nothing creative." Webb left the office with his jaw clenched. Under review. After everything he'd done for this, after all the arrests, all the drug busts, all the times he'd put his life on the line, this was the thanks he got? He needed a win. Something big enough to remind everyone, especially himself, that he was a good cop, that he was his father's son. He just needed the right opportunity. Regina Matthews drove through Oakmont with the radio off, mentally reviewing her briefing notes. The federal civilian law enforcement partnership program she oversaw was up for renewal. $75 million allocated to train local police departments in de-escalation, constitutional policing, and community engagement. She'd been reviewing compliance reports for weeks. Lakewood Heights Police Department was flagged in her system, multiple complaints, training requirements ignored, suspicious use of funds. She'd been planning to recommend defunding them even before today. Irony, she'd later realize, has a vicious sense of timing. Marcus Webb was 3 blocks away when he spotted the Mercedes. Charcoal gray, temporary dealer tags, windows tinted dark. And behind the wheel, he could just make out the driver. Black woman. Expensive car. Wrong neighborhood. His mind made the calculation instantly. The same calculation he'd made 100 times before. This was Oakmont old money, white money. That car was too nice. That driver was too. He didn't finish the thought. Not consciously. He didn't have to. Webb hit his lights and called for backup. Suspicious vehicle. Possible drug courier. Requesting secondary unit. In her rear-view mirror, Regina saw the flash of red and blue. Her heart rate didn't spike. 23 years of military training ensured that. Instead, she activated her phone's voice recorder and placed it on the passenger seat. Screen down, she pulled over with textbook precision, put the car in park, turned off the engine, and placed her hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Protocol. Always protocol. Webb approached with his hand, resting on his weapon. Through her side mirror, Regina watched his body language, aggressive posture, shoulders squared, jaw set. She'd seen that stance before. On her uncle's video, on her brother's dashcam. On 1,000 viral videos that always ended the same way. Not today, she thought. Not to me. Here's where things get interesting. Drop a comment if you think you know how this ends. Trust me, you don't. License and registration, Webb demanded. Regina reached slowly for her glove compartment, announcing each movement. I'm retrieving my registration and insurance. My license is in my wallet. My military identification is... Just give me your license. She handed him 3 cards. Driver's license. Military ID with full credentials. Pentagon security badge with clearance level visible. Webb glanced at them for maybe 2 seconds. Step out of the vehicle. Officer, may I ask why I've been stopped? I'll ask the questions. Step out. Regina's voice remained perfectly level. I'd like to understand the reason for this stop. I haven't committed any traffic violations. Failure to signal. Now, step out, or I'll remove you myself. Through it all, Regina's mind was working, cataloging, documenting. Badge number 4719. Timestamp, 9:47 a.m. 3 civilian vehicles passing. Potential witnesses. No reasonable suspicion articulated. No probable cause for search. She stepped out of the vehicle. A second police car pulled up. Officer Jennifer Ortiz emerged, her expression carefully neutral, but Regina caught something else. Recognition? Concern? Ortiz was Latina, maybe early 30s, military bearing that Regina recognized instantly. Search her, Webb ordered. Ortiz hesitated. Marcus, department policy requires, I don't need a policy lecture. Search her. A same-gender search, Ortiz finished quietly. I'll do it. Webb's face reddened. I'm the primary officer. I'll conduct the search. Regina spoke clearly, knowing her phone was recording. Officer, I'm formally requesting a female officer conduct any search. This is my right under department policy and constitutional law. Webb stepped closer, invading her space. You don't get to tell me how to do my job. That's when Regina made her choice. Not submission, not resistance. Something else entirely. Officer Webb, badge number 4719. I'm invoking federal military protection protocols under code 77 Alpha. I'm requesting immediate contact with my commanding officer at the Department of Defense. The temperature dropped 10 degrees. Ortiz's eyes went wide. She was former Army MP. She knew exactly what that code meant. Webb didn't. But he knew he'd just lost control of the situation. You're not calling anyone. You're being detained. On what legal grounds? Obstruction of justice. I've obeyed every lawful order. Your body camera will confirm that. Regina paused. Let that sink in. Officer Ortiz, as a witness to this interaction, please note that I've complied fully and am being denied my constitutional right to legal counsel. Webb's hand went to his cuffs. You're under arrest. The Pentagon's Emergency Operations Center received the alert at 10:03 a.m. Code 7. 7 Alpha military officer under unlawful detention by civilian law enforcement. The duty officer's hand froze over his coffee. Who activated it? The analyst checked her screen. Colonel Regina Matthews, DoD Operations Division. The duty officer went pale. Get me General Holbrook. Now. Within 90 seconds, Major General Patricia Holbrook was in the briefing room, reviewing Matthews' file. 23 years of distinguished service. Current assignment: Director of Federal Civilian Law Enforcement Partnerships. Security clearance: top secret. Oversight responsibility: $75 million in federal funding to 143 police departments nationwide. Where is she? Holbrook demanded. Lakewood Heights Police Department, detained approximately, the analyst. Checked 17 minutes ago. Holbrook picked up the phone. Get me DoD General Counsel. Then get me the FBI Civil Rights Division. Then get me a helicopter. And somebody find out exactly how much money we give Lakewood Heights. The analyst's fingers flew across her keyboard. $8.2 million annually, ma'am. Holbrook's smile was cold. Not anymore. At Lakewood Heights Police Station, Regina sat in an interview room that smelled like stale coffee and fear. She'd been there for 93 minutes. They couldn't hold her much longer without charging her, and they knew it. But Webb had committed. He'd filed a report. And in policing, backing down looked like weakness. Her wrists bore the faint marks of handcuffs they'd finally removed 20 minutes ago. She hadn't asked for water, hadn't asked for anything. She just sat, hands folded, running calculations. Chief Garrett's secretary knocked on his door for the third time in 10 minutes. Sir, there's another call. They say it's urgent. Garrett sighed and picked up. Chief Garrett. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and absolutely terrifying. Chief Garrett. This is Catherine Wells, General Counsel for the Department of Defense. We have a significant situation. Garrett's throat went dry. What kind of situation? The kind where one of your officers arrested a federal military officer without cause. The kind where your department is about to be audited by every federal agency with jurisdiction. The kind that ends careers. Would you like me to continue? Garrett closed his eyes. Who did we arrest? Colonel Regina Matthews. I believe you know the name. He did. God help him, he did. Regina Matthews, niece of Thomas Matthews, the man Garrett had watched get beaten by officers 30 years ago when Garrett was just a rookie. The man Garrett had promised to make things right for. The man whose family Garrett had betrayed every day since by doing nothing, by looking away, by prioritizing his pension over his principles. The room tilted. Chief Garrett? Are you there? I'm here. Federal representation is en route. They'll be there in a pause, 14 minutes. I strongly suggest you have Colonel Matthews released immediately and prepare for a very long conversation. The line went dead. Garrett stood slowly, his legs unsteady. 28 years on this job, 18 months until retirement, full pension waiting, and now this. He walked to Webb's desk. Release her. Webb looked up. Sir? Colonel Matthews. Release her. Now. I've already filed charges. We can't just, Marcus, you just arrested a Pentagon official who controls our department's federal funding. We're not debating this. Webb's face hardened. Then you release her. I'm standing by my report. And there it was. The moment Garrett could have saved himself, could have pulled rank, could have fixed it, could have done the right thing. Instead, he said, we'll sort this out when her attorney arrives. Cowardice is rarely dramatic. Usually, it's just exhausted. The federal team arrived in 3 black SUVs with enough legal firepower to dismantle a small government, but they didn't storm the station. They walked in quietly, professionally, like surgeons arriving for a complicated operation. Regina was released immediately. But she didn't leave. Instead, she asked for a conference room. Chief Garrett, Officer Webb, Officer Ortiz, and 4 federal attorneys sat down. Regina remained standing. "I need Officer Webb's body camera footage," she said simply. Garrett started to speak. Regina held up one hand. "Chief Garrett, I've been reviewing your department's compliance with federal partnership requirements for 6 months. You've falsified training records, misappropriated funds, and systematically buried complaints against problem officers. I have a dossier, 147 pages." The room went silent. I was planning to recommend defunding before today. I was being thorough, building an ironclad case. Regina's voice never rose. "Officer Webb just handed me personal standing to act immediately." She turned to Ortiz. "Officer Ortiz, I recognize your bearing. Military police?" Ortiz nodded. 8 years, ma'am, Army MP. "Then you understand chain of command. You understand what happens when orders are unlawful." Regina's eyes held hers. "You've been watching Officer Webb for a while, haven't you?" The question hung in the air. Webb stared at Ortiz, realization dawning. Ortiz reached into her jacket and pulled out a small recording device. "I've been cooperating with Internal Affairs for 6 months. I have documentation of 17 incidents involving Officer Webb, including evidence tampering and planted narcotics." Webb shot to his feet. "You sit down, officer," one of the federal attorneys said. It wasn't a request. Regina turned to Chief Garrett. "You knew some of it, maybe all of it, and you did nothing." Garrett's voice was barely audible. "I was 18 months from retirement. My uncle was Thomas Matthews. You were there the night he was beaten. You told him you'd make it right someday." Regina's composure finally cracked, just for a second. "My brother was Marcus Matthews. He died in a traffic stop 3 years ago. Cleared. No charges." Garrett's face went gray. "You've had 28 years to choose differently, Chief. You chose your pension. So here's what happens now. Subscribe if you want to see how this ends. This is where it gets nuclear." The press conference wasn't held at City Hall. Regina chose the federal building deliberately, standing at a podium flanked by DoD officials, FBI representatives, and ACLU attorneys. The symbolism was unmistakable. This wasn't local anymore. "My name is Colonel Regina Matthews, United States Army, Director of Federal Civilian Law Enforcement Partnerships. This morning, I was unlawfully detained, searched, and arrested by Officer Marcus Webb of the Lakewood Heights Police Department, despite full compliance, military credentials, and zero probable cause." The cameras flashed. The reporters leaned in. Officer Webb's body camera footage, which his department tried to suppress, tells a clear story. But this isn't about one officer. This is about a system that has protected, promoted, and enabled this behavior for decades. She laid out the dossier: falsified training records, buried complaints, misused federal funds. A pattern of racial profiling that wasn't even hidden. It was policy disguised as proactive policing. Effective immediately. "I'm recommending suspension of all federal funding to Lakewood Heights Police Department, pending comprehensive audit and reform. Additionally, I'm proposing new federal standards for any department receiving military partnership funds. We're calling them the Matthews Accord." The requirements were brutal. Quarterly bias training certified by federal monitors, mandatory body cameras with civilian review access, independent investigation of all use of force incidents, automatic funding suspension for civil rights violations, annual federal compliance audits. "These standards will be voluntary," Regina said. "But so is federal funding." The message was clear: reform or go broke. Marcus Webb watched the press conference from his attorney's office. The union lawyer who'd been so confident that morning was now reviewing exit strategies. "Marcus, they have everything. The body cam footage contradicts your report in 17 places. Officer Ortiz has recordings of you admitting to evidence tampering. And they just found cocaine in your locker that doesn't match any department inventory. Webb's world was ending in real time. That's not mine. Doesn't matter. They have probable cause for search. And your behavior today gave it to them. The attorney closed his folder. The union isn't going to back you on this. You're too toxic. My advice? Take whatever deal the feds offer. But Webb couldn't hear him. He was thinking about his father's photographs on his wall. The legacy he'd spent 8 years trying to honor. Except it turned out his father had buried complaints too. Had been investigated 3 times for excessive force. Had died during a foot chase because he'd been 50 pounds overweight and refused to admit he couldn't do the job anymore. The myth was more comfortable than the man. I want a trial, Webb said. His attorney stared. That's suicide. I want a trial. Federal prosecutors don't bring cases they can't win. Webb's trial lasted 3 days, and by the end of day 1, the outcome wasn't in question. The only question was how bad it would get. The body camera footage played on a loop. Regina's calm compliance. Webb's escalating aggression. His refusal to acknowledge her military credentials. His violation of search policies. His fabricated probable cause. Then Ortiz took the stand. How long have you been documenting Officer Webb's behavior? 6 months. Why? Ortiz looked directly at Webb. Because I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, not to protect bad cops. The recordings were damning. Webb admitting he planted evidence on a suspect who probably deserved it anyway. Webb joking about racial profiling being efficient. Webb bragging about arrests he knew wouldn't stick but looked good on paper. The defense tried to paint Ortiz as a betrayer, but it backfired spectacularly. She was a decorated veteran, a single mother, and someone who'd risked everything to do the right thing. The jury saw a hero. They saw Webb as exactly what he was. Guilty on all counts. Federal civil rights violations, false arrest, official misconduct, perjury. The judge sentenced him to 3 years federal prison. Webb stood there, numb, as his attorney gathered papers. In the gallery, his ex-wife left without looking back. His daughter, who he'd been fighting to see more often, wouldn't remember him by the time he got out. But the worst part came during impact statements. Regina Matthews stood at the podium one final time. Officer Webb, I don't hate you. I pity you. You were a product of a system that rewarded your worst instincts. But you had choices. Every single day, you had choices. And every single day, you chose power over principle. She paused. My brother didn't get choices. He complied, and he died anyway. So I can't feel sorry for you. But I hope someday you understand what you were really serving. Webb finally understood. He'd been serving a myth. And myths don't keep you warm in a federal prison cell. Chief Garrett resigned before he could be fired. In exchange for testimony against other officers and full cooperation with federal audits, he received immunity from prosecution. But he lost his pension anyway, a technicality about falsified records. His last day in the office, he stood in front of the old photographs in the hallway. Pictures of officers who'd served with honor. His name would never join them. Instead, he'd be a case study in how good people become complicit. He drove to the cemetery where Thomas Matthews was buried. Stood at the grave for 20 minutes, trying to find words. Finally, he just said, I'm sorry. I should have been better. It wasn't enough. It never would be. The Matthews Accord passed Congress within 18 months. Not unanimously, there was fierce resistance from police unions and law and order politicians, but the wave of public support was overwhelming. Viral videos, protests, and Regina's testimony before 3 separate committees made it unstoppable. Within 3 years, 2,847 police departments had implemented Matthews Accord standards. Not because they wanted to, because they couldn't survive without federal funding. The measurable results were stunning. Civil rights complaints dropped 43%. Community trust in law enforcement increased 67%. Use of force. Incidents declined by half. And perhaps most importantly, departments started attracting different recruits, people who wanted to serve communities, not dominate them. Jennifer Ortiz was offered a position with the FBI's Civil Rights Division. She took it. Her daughter asked if she was a hero. Ortiz said, "No, baby. I just did what was right when it mattered." But she was a hero. They both were. Regina Matthews was promoted to Brigadier General 2 years after the incident. Her new assignment, implementing the Matthews Accord nationwide and liaising with international partners adopting similar standards. Her marriage survived, barely. David later admitted he'd been jealous of her mission, feeling secondary to a cause bigger than their relationship. They went to counseling. Slowly, they rebuilt. Her daughter, now 16, asked to visit the Smithsonian's new civil rights exhibit. There, in a glass case, were Regina's handcuffs from that September morning. Below them, a placard. These handcuffs were placed on Colonel Regina Matthews by Officer Marcus Webb on the 12th of September, 2023. The incident sparked the Matthews Accord, the most comprehensive police reform legislation in American history. Sometimes, justice requires only one thing: refusing to accept that this is just how things are. Regina stood there with her daughter, remembering the fear, the anger, the cold metal against her wrists. But also remembering the choice she made, not to submit, not to rage, but to weaponize her professionalism into something that would outlive them all. "Mom?" her daughter asked. "Were you scared?" Regina thought about it, terrified. But fear isn't an excuse for silence. They stood there for a while longer, watching other visitors read the plaque, seeing the recognition in their eyes, recognition that what happened to Regina Matthews could have happened to them, could still happen to them, unless the system changes. And for the first time in decades, the system was changing. Marcus Webb served 26 months of his 3-year sentence before release on good behavior. He moved to a small town where nobody knew his name, got a job in a warehouse, and lived quietly. His daughter sent him a letter when she turned 18. It was short. "I needed you to be better." He kept it on his refrigerator. A reminder that some mistakes you carry forever. Regina visits her brother's grave every year on the anniversary of his death. This year, she brought something new: a copy of the Matthews Accord, now law in all 50 states. "We did it, Marcus," she whispered. "It's not perfect, but it's better." The work continues. It always does. But for the first time, the people doing the work have the tools they need. Federal oversight, financial accountability, and the legacy of one woman who refused to be silent. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling us what justice means to you. And subscribe to Crime Nest Stories for more accounts of courage, corruption, and the long fight for accountability. Because these stories need to be told, and we're just getting started. This is Crime Nest Stories, where every story is a reminder that change begins with one person saying, "Not today, not to me, not ever again."